Hi, my name is Rowan Willow, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about my Honors College creative thesis project. The project was titled Decay, an experiment in mycoremediation, and was a play space held through the month of October 2019 at Corpus Arts, a radical queer resource center and art space located in downtown Albuquerque. It was a project about mushrooms, but it was also a project about fashion, learning from non-human organisms, fighting oppressive systems, making things, studying, and finding a way to root ourselves, despite living in a time that can feel hopeless. Climate change is a looming, inescapable fear that threatens us in unexpected ways, and is filtered through a dense socio-political web that ends in environmental racism and climate injustice. More and more, people in positions of power can feel like grand supervillains in the quest to build a more sustainable and caring future. Our own existences and livelihoods feel more precarious, like they could topple at any time. And in many ways, that's what the current health crisis is showing us. We need to find a way to conduct our everyday lives when nothing is certain, and find comfort in what is reliable. For me, what is reliable is ecosystems, life cycles, and adaptability. I also believe that relationships of care with other organisms, human and non-human, are reliable. That's a lot of stuff, and we'll get to that later, but first, I want to talk a little bit about who I am as an artist so I can show you the context that this work is filtered through. I am an interdisciplinary artist focused on design based on biology and ecology, learning from non-human organisms, and building community by providing access to food, materials, and information. By providing resources on do-it-yourself ways of food and material production, I hope that we can lay the foundation of strong communities that can re-envision our relationships to the extractive industries we rely on. Some projects I have worked on in the past include creating a community garden at the Albuquerque Museum, creating collaborative art zines about fracking in the Greater Chaco region, and creating a speculative design project about collecting and harvesting the chemical signals in our own tears as a self-defense product. In the past couple years, I have shown work throughout the country, including at the Biodesign Challenge at Parsons New School and the Global Community Bio Summit at MIT Media Lab. The zines about fracking in the Greater Chaco region have also been recently featured in Hyperallergic for the ongoing censorship battle they are in with the New Mexico Museum and the New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs. So, that was a picture of me now, but here's a picture of me as a kid. I'm the one covered in cake, wearing a tiara and pouting. When I was a kid, I was always making my own outfits, and my dream was to be a fashion designer. I found solace in fashion because it was a way to express myself. Fashion is an everyday way to communicate with the world, and I liked how it could translate how I feel on the inside to the outside. Fashion is still really empowering and a subject I'm excited about, but the industry that surrounds it is also a huge problem. Fast fashion is a term for the quick production of low-quality, cheap clothing based on current trends, as distributed by brands like H&M and Forever 21. The fast fashion industry is responsible for 10% of the world's carbon emissions, and often outsources labor in order to pay workers low wages in bad working conditions. As cited in Natse Audrey Chiez's book, Other Biological Futures, you can sometimes tell which color of denim is popular in New York or Paris by the color of certain rivers in China. How can we reclaim the empowerment that fashion can bring us while leaving behind the exploitative industry that fuels it? Okay, so remember when I started this video, I said, this is a project about mushrooms. You're probably like, what? Who even cares about mushrooms? And why are you talking about fashion? Fungi are amazing organisms. The mushrooms are only the fruiting body of the fungi, and the last part of the fungal life cycle. The rest is a vast, rhizomatic, underground network called the mycelium, which can span entire forests. These networks are some of the world's largest and oldest organisms, and can live through forests dying and being reborn many times over. People who like mushrooms like to refer to this network as nature's internet, because it communicates with the whole forest, and helps distribute nutrients throughout a forest to many different organisms. Fungi are often the first responder in the event of deforestation and help reestablish biodiversity and regrow the forest. The term mycoremediation refers to rehabilitating natural environments using mushrooms. Some mushrooms can help filter heavy metals out of the environments, and others can break down plastic or toxins. What if we used fungal knowledge to remediate our own human ecosystems? Can we look at fashion through a lens of fungi? I started this project in an effort to create do-it-yourself textiles out of mushrooms. But as I dug more and more into the histories of fashion and mycology, textile manufacturing, concepts of decay, and systems of capitalism, I realized the production of a perfect textile might not be the point. Fungi helped me to understand that sometimes things exist in a web, and exploration is sometimes more important than production. So, what I did was create a public play space in downtown Albuquerque where visitors could come in and learn about the ideas I had been researching for my project. The exhibition employed fungi as a lens to study and unravel oppressive structures woven by capitalism and colonialism. It featured information and ideas on fungi and sustainable fashion practices as an effort to discuss the ecological principle of decay in human ecosystems. The play space included habitats where 3 species of oyster mushrooms grew alongside artworks and material experiments I had created while exploring these ideas. These experiments included a linen dress I had decayed using mushrooms, prints made by pressing rehydrated mushrooms into fabric with an iron, paper made from mushrooms, and failed paper I had made from different mushrooms but sewn into a dress. One of the artworks was a nightgown that had been gifted to me, onto which I sewed a rabbit pelt I had found in an abandoned box of fabric, and mushrooms I had grown, dried, and embroidered the words "I love you" onto. Another artwork was a quilt I had made from donated fabric that had sentimental meanings to people, including a wedding dress from a canceled wedding, a sweater that had been worn during a sexual assault, and pajamas from someone's mother who had passed away. I invited people to curl up in this blanket and feel the warmth of decay. I also included all of the books I had been reading that informed the play space. Because Corpus Arts was already a queer library packed with radical literature, I wanted to extend the idea of a reading room, and I brought in furniture and tables, so participants felt welcome to curl up and read in the environment. Because my work is about process, I wanted to let my viewers into my world and show all different stages of my work. To unify the show, I wrote and printed a zine that acted as a gallery guide to each work in the exhibit, but also provided information on how to grow mushrooms and make things from them. It also had a list of literary resources and thoughts on how to start and sustain an activist practice. That kind of stuff is hard because it feels like the whole world is against you, but you just have to take it day by day and find comfort in what you can. Using funding from the UNM Honors College, I was able to print 190 of these zines and distribute them at the show, Albuquerque Zine Fest, and the National Collegiate Honors Conference in New Orleans. I made the zine in the old, pre-digital way of making zines, where I started with master copies that I Xeroxed and assembled by myself. I like this way of making zines because you don't need access or knowledge to digital editing software, so it is accessible to a broader range of people, which I think is the purpose of making zines in the first place. Zines are a way of distributing information at a low cost, in a decentralized manner, where you don't have to get permission from anyone or rely on a publishing house. I also held 2 workshops in the space, where I taught participants how to grow mushrooms using accessible materials. The materials I used were mason jars, coffee grounds, coffee filters, and the ends of store-bought oyster mushrooms. I sent people home with the jars they had assembled and worksheets explaining how to care for these mushrooms at home. It took a lot of work to get to this exhibition, and it was mostly chaotic and nonlinear, like a mycelial network. This time was scary and overwhelming, but also a time of creative genesis and experimentation. A lot of the time, I was surprised about what was important for the final project and what was not. Never in a million years did I think that my failed experiments would be such an integral part of the final project. One of the first things I did when starting on this project was go on the UNM Land Arts of the American West program, which is a semester-long, 12-credit-hour class where we spent 6 weeks camping across the American West and making solo and collaborative artworks dealing with the ecologies we witnessed. While I was already interested in mushrooms at this time, land arts really brought home the idea of decay and the role mushrooms have in the ecosystem. Decay is so cool. It gets a bad rap, but it is such an important part of ecosystems, and one that is neglected in the human ecosystem around us. Decay returns nutrients to ecosystems and allows the next cycles of life to begin, and fungi are so critical to this process. These realizations were important to forming my ideas about activism concerning capitalism and colonialism. How do we decay the parts of our environment that don't serve us, and use what we learned from those empires to create the next, better cycles of human life? Another important aspect of creating this project was learning to grow mushrooms. I chose to grow pink oyster mushrooms because they are a relatively hardy species that can withstand the high temperatures in the New Mexico summer and can fight off a certain amount of competition from mold. Mushrooms are famously hard to grow, and it has only been in the last 100 or so years that people have been figuring out how to do it on a budget. It's still very experimental, even for experienced mushroom growers. The main considerations are sterility and humidity. Mushrooms need a humid environment to grow, but that humidity also makes it a prime breeding ground for mold, which can kill mycelium. They also need to be shocked into growing by varying temperatures and humidity. Growing mushrooms is very different from growing plants, because mushrooms are just the reproductive organ of the organism, and only come out when they are just uncomfortable enough to feel the need to reproduce. By making an outdoor humidity tent and pasteurizing straw for them to grow on, I was able to fruit the mushrooms, and I used this knowledge to grow mushrooms at the exhibit as well. It was really important for me to learn about mushroom ecology close up and provided a new understanding of fungi. From these experiments, I gained a lot of insights into how important caring relationships with both human and non-human species are. These relationships are slow and gradual, but they provide a mutual understanding that is comfortable. I find that these relationships are a place of rest in our hectic everyday lives, where growth can be examined day by day and remind us of our own growth. I also conducted a lot of material experiments during this time. I learned how to make paper out of turkey tail mushrooms and failed at making paper from the much more common shiitake mushrooms. I had a studio to work in at this time, which became an experimental laboratory. It was important not to work for the sake of a specific product, but allow myself to change my process and allow myself to fail. These failures informed the setup of the actual exhibition and helped me figure out what was realistic and what was too idealistic for the play space. I incorporated a lot of the failed experiments into the play space as a gesture to my process. So, why did all of this research end up as a play space, and why is this work important? I really like the idea of play as an inherently anti-capitalist sentiment, because there is no clear end product of play. It's a magical place where anything goes and you are able to explore and express yourself. I preferred an interactive play space over a traditional gallery show, because a traditional gallery show supports this ivory tower of the fine arts world, which has a history of colonialism. I think there is also a certain amount of dishonesty to a traditional show, where methods of creating are veiled and hold the artists as separate from the viewers. I don't think arts for art's sake is important. I want to create stuff that has a tangible impact. The literary resources were a big guide for me in formulating these ideas, and gave me insights on not only fashion and fungi, but also organizing, radical study, existing in precarity, and ways of relating to a damaged planet. What studying these texts brought home was that the revolution isn't a moment of charged action or something we are preparing for, but it is a state that we already exist in. It's not about how you would act in a future revolutions, it's how you are acting now. One big project takeaway is that change starts close to us, in our own communities, where we can be together and listen to each other and heal together. Communities where we can offer mutual aid and begin to relieve reliance on oppressive power structures that we have no control over. power structures that may provide us with resources, but ultimately keep power away from us. Community is a beautiful place where we have power with each other and not power over each other. Activism isn't about looking out into all the problems of the whole world, but peering into the microcosm of our own ecologies and relationships. All of this stuff is really complex, and we're still figuring it out. The question then becomes, what does community even look like, and how do I resist and enact change when all odds are stacked against me? There's no perfect answer to that question, but I wanted to end on a clip from the podcast For the Wild, where Ayana Young interviews Ariel Sekwi Daranger about Indigenous resistance against the pipeline through Wet'suwet'en land. In this clip, she discusses the importance of community involvement in fighting oppressive power structures.
How do we talk about ending the expansion and the development of an industry that we rely on, not just for the infrastructure, but for jobs, for employment, for putting roofs over our heads and food on the table and clothes on our children's backs, is we have to envision something different. And it's not easy, but it's possible. And we have to build that. And I think for me, what I'm learning through this book, Joyful Militancy, is that it comes not from like actively necessarily, I'm not saying that you have to stop it, but it's the act alone of trying to smash colonization and end, the pipeline and end these projects is alone in itself is not going to save us. What's going to save us is building community. It means sitting down with people and eating food with them and connecting with them and supporting them in ways that might seem really mundane, helping someone care for their child, helping someone to learn how to knit or learn a skill or like learn simple things and building relationships that are not reliant on the empire, not reliant on these systems.
So, what's next? I think that's a really hard question to answer, and I think the answer won't come all at once. To decay old oppressive power structures, we have to build new systems in their place. New systems where we share power and autonomy. I think it's important to know that we are always already in the action, and while we don't know what comes out the other side, to trust that it is as good as the work we put in. It's not that I never have doubts or that I never feel hopeless, but those are thoughts and feelings we all have and we all have to acknowledge and be mindful of. It takes time, it takes care, and it takes love, both for yourself and for the world. For more information about my work and for a downloadable PDF of my zine and thesis paper, please visit rowanwillow.world.